I've spent countless nights on these endless highways where the steady hum of my rig and the solitude of the dark road were my constant companions. Yet nothing had prepared me for the night I first heard her, a soft voice emerging from the static on my CB radio that would forever alter my understanding of the open road. It was a chilly autumn evening when I set out on a long haul through a stretch of highway that was as deserted as it was endless. I remember the sky was a sheet of inky black, punctuated only by the feeble glow of distant streetlights. My mind, worn down by miles and endless solitude, was barely keeping pace with the rhythm of the engine. Then, amid the usual chatter and the hiss of static, a sound cut through the monotony, a voice, tender yet chilling, calling out my name, Eddie. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, fatigue can make the mind conjure phantoms on lonely roads. I fiddled with the CB, retuning the frequency in the hope that it was merely interference. But the voice persisted, soft and insistent. Eddie, come closer. It wasn't the typical gruff banter of a fellow trucker. It was something else entirely, as if a presence from beyond the ordinary was trying to reach me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as a cold shiver ran down my spine. The voice had an eerie quality, a mix of sorrow and longing that made it impossible to dismiss as mere static. I drove on, each mile echoing with that haunting call, unable to shake the feeling that something was reaching out from the darkness. By the time I pulled into a nearly abandoned truck stop just before dawn, my heart was still pounding with uncertainty. I sat in the cab, the soft light of early morning filtering through the window, and replayed that uncanny moment in my mind. I couldn't help but wonder if I was the only one to hear it. Later, in hushed conversations over stale coffee with other drivers, I learned that there were whispers of a spectral voice, an inexplicable sound that had been reported on similar desolate stretches. Some claimed it was the lament of a long-lost soul. Others insisted it was a siren's call, meant to lure unsuspecting drivers into the void. As I prepared to resume my journey, the memory of that first call stayed with me, a persistent echo that hinted at something sinister lurking beneath the veneer of the familiar highway. Little did I know that this solitary whisper was only the beginning, and that every subsequent mile would deepen the mystery of the siren who haunted the dark, lonely roads. In the days following that unsettling night, the highway began to change before my eyes. What once was a route of freedom and endless possibility now seemed fraught with inexplicable anomalies. I found myself driving the same familiar roads with a heightened sense of awareness, listening intently for that ghostly call. And sure enough, the voice returned, this time not only calling my name, but the names of other drivers. One bitterly cold night, while I navigated a long, desolate stretch where only the glare of my headlights broke the oppressive darkness, my CB radio crackled with fragments of conversation. I could make out hurried voices among the static, voices of truckers recounting eerie encounters. One caller, known only by the handle Buck, admitted in a trembling tone. I answered her call, and next thing I knew, my rig was idling on the shoulder, and I wasn't there anymore. The account sent a fresh wave of dread down my spine. I began to piece together a disturbing pattern. Every time the siren's voice returned, it came with a sense of urgency, whispering not just my name, but the names of others. The messages were cryptic and laden with warning. Heed the call, but the road demands a toll. I started keeping mental notes, and later physical ones, of the strange happenings. In the break rooms at truck stops, over cups of weak coffee, drivers exchanged hushed stories. They spoke of a phantom woman whose voice would beckon them from the static, and of rigs found abandoned with engines still humming as if their drivers had been spirited away. Each recollection added another layer of terror to my own experience. I remembered how, on that first night, I'd felt a deep chill as the voice had murmured, "Eddie, come closer." And now I began to understand that responding to that call might come at a price. The highway itself was no longer just a path between destinations. It had transformed into a living, breathing enigma, one that collected souls with every whispered plea. As the nights wore on, I encountered more unsettling signs. A section of road where the pavement seemed to vanish into nothingness, mile markers that flickered in and out of existence, and an almost palpable heaviness in the air. The highway was morphing before my eyes, its familiar lines dissolving into eerie, unpredictable stretches that defied logic. And in every moment of that transformation, the siren's voice was there, as persistent as a heartbeat. I pressed on, compelled by a mixture of dread and curiosity. With every mile, I wondered if I might be the next to vanish, if answering that alluring call would result in the same fate as those who had gone before me. The enigma of the siren was deepening, and the question that haunted me was simple yet terrifying. What was the true cost of listening? One particularly frigid night, as a bitter wind howled through my rig and the moon hung low in a starless sky, I found myself on a notorious stretch known among drivers as the Vanishing Mile. This section of road was infamous for its strange occurrences, where familiar landmarks were replaced by surreal distortions, and time itself seemed to warp. It was here that the toll of the siren would reveal itself. The radio was unusually silent as I drove, until suddenly a burst of static gave way to a chilling message. "The toll is due." Those words, clear and resonant, struck me like a physical blow. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed down, unsure whether to flee or confront the ominous declaration. I recalled the accounts of drivers who had vanished, each story punctuated by a sudden, inexplicable disappearance that left behind only a running truck and unanswered questions. I stopped at a small, deserted rest area, the only light coming from my rig's dashboard and the distant flickering neon of a long-forgotten sign. In the silence, I switched the radio to the frequency that had become synonymous with these spectral occurrences. The static faded, and the voice returned, clearer now, almost as if speaking from right beside me. "Eddie, you must pay." The words were laden with a sorrow that felt ancient, a command that resonated with inevitability. Sitting in the darkness of my cab, I tried to make sense of it all. Was this toll a price in money, or something far more intangible, a debt of memory, regret, or guilt? I recalled the stories from the other drivers, each one hinting that those who answered the siren's call ended up paying in ways that defied explanation. Their trucks, left idling on the roadside, were silent testaments to a mystery that defied rational thought. I felt an overwhelming urge to confront the mystery, even as terror gripped me. Determined to understand, I began retracing the routes where the vanishings had occurred. I recorded every detail, mysterious gaps in the road, inexplicable changes in the landscape, and above all, the haunting voice on the CB that insisted, "Pay the toll." Every mile deepened my conviction that the highway was a collector of secrets, a keeper of debts that must eventually be settled. In that lonely, desolate moment, under the indifferent sky, I knew that I was inching closer to a truth that was both horrifying and unavoidable. The toll was not measured in dollars or time, it was the cost of bearing the weight of lost lives and unacknowledged regrets. And as the voice continued to echo in the recesses of my mind, I realized that to continue on this road was to accept that I, too, carried a debt from the past, a debt that demanded remembrance and, ultimately, reparation. The following nights blurred into a relentless pursuit of answers. My fellow drivers grew silent and wary. The once boisterous camaraderie at truck stops was replaced by haunted glances and whispered warnings. I, however, felt compelled to push onward, determined to meet the siren's challenge head on. One especially bleak night, as rain slicked the highway and the cold seeped through the metal of my rig, I approached a decrepit overpass that local lore had named the Final Gate. The structure loomed ahead like a crumbling monument to forgotten tragedies. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I slowed to a stop beneath it. I knew somehow that here the highway would demand its final toll. Switching the CB to that dreaded frequency, I listened. The static gave way once again to that familiar, sorrowful voice. "This is your final call, Eddie," it intoned, each word resonating with an undeniable gravity. I sat frozen, my mind racing with memories of all those who had vanished, each story a fragment of a larger, unyielding mystery. Then the voice softened, almost tenderly. "Your debt is not paid in coin, but in remembrance. What will you surrender to be free?" In that charged silence, I fumbled in my glove compartment and withdrew a small, worn photograph, a relic from a happier time when the road meant hope rather than regret. It was a picture of my family, a reminder of everything I once held dear. Without fully understanding why, I pressed the photo against the dashboard, as if offering it as a sacrifice to the unseen force that governed this cursed stretch of highway. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, as if stirred by my offering, the rain momentarily ceased, and the overpass's harsh outlines softened into a gentle glow. The siren's voice returned one final time, quiet and almost grateful. "You have remembered, but the road always takes its due." Her words, both a benediction and a curse, echoed in the stillness that followed. I restarted my engine with a heart heavy yet strangely unburdened. As I drove away from the overpass, the oppressive dread that had haunted my every mile seemed to lift just a fraction. I knew that the highway would never truly release its grip on those who traversed it, that every journey would carry the echo of lost souls and unspoken debts. But on that night, I had faced my own toll, and in doing so, had found a measure of solace. Every time I now hear that soft, spectral whisper over the CB, I remember that final toll, not as a curse, but as a solemn reminder that the road we travel is paved with memories. And as long as I drive, I carry the burden and the blessing of remembering, knowing that sometimes, to move forward, we must first pay the price of the past.